Your local newspaper brings you exclusive news from your community every week, and it's been doing this for the best part of a century or longer. Mostly it's news about your community from your community, but sometimes it's bigger than that. I'm Dave Hickey, and this is about one such story from the Connacht Tribune in Galway. The beauty of the newspaper business is that you never know what tomorrow will bring. And how we react to the unexpected determines whether it ends in history or in failure. This is a story that landed on the plate of the legendary Connacht Tribune editor Tom Kenny when a plane made history by landing on a watery Connemara bog. This is the story of how a local newspaper scooped the world, using local knowledge and context to gain exclusive access and interviews with the two men all the world's media were searching for. To use the newspaper's headline of the day, this is a story that dazzles. On the morning of Sunday 15th of August 1919, an Australian soldier on his honeymoon in Clifden was one of the first people to see, emerging through the mist over the Atlantic, a small aircraft the whole world had been waiting to hear from. The plane circled the area before spotting radio antennae and dropping to earth at the Marconi station a few miles south of the town. Two men emerged, and one announced to the stunned Marconi operators, "I'm Alcock, just come from Newfoundland." The Connacht Tribune later reported, "He uttered an epic in 6 words and changed as with a breath the current of history and romance." Alcock Brown had left St John's, Newfoundland just over 16 hours previously in poor weather but with a strong tailwind. They were one of several crews attempting to be the first to fly non-stop across the Atlantic to earn a £10,000 prize on offer from the Daily Mail. Their radio failed soon after the takeoff, and the long silence led some to believe that they may have crashed into the ocean, like an attempt the previous month. The world's media was waiting in Dublin, having received a signal from Newfoundland on Saturday evening that the pair were heading for Ireland and expected to reach the coast about 20 hours after taking off. After landing, Alcock had one of the Marconi men send a message to the Royal Aero Club that they had succeeded, and the international media began a race to reach the two aviators first and break the news to the waiting world. But they were beaten by a local newspaperman using local contacts and good journalism to scoop the world. So, what was it about this Atlantic crossing that made it the biggest news story since the end of World War I? Why would an English newspaper put up a prize of £10,000, almost €500,000 today, for the first non-stop crossing of the Atlantic by aeroplane? The answer is because it was very dangerous. There was a serious risk that some of the crews attempting it would die. It was also a throwback to the more romantic days of exploration at the end of the 19th century, before the world exploded into war and all was changed utterly. Humans had only had powered flight for 16 years, and in that time most flying was done over land. No serious thought was given to long flights over the ocean until 1913, but World War I intervened, stopping any serious attempts. While flying over land was dangerous, the pilot at least had the benefit of landmarks to guide him, cloud cover permitting, and usually a convenient field or road on which to land if necessary. Flying over the ocean was an entirely more hazardous trip, with no landmarks to get bearings from, and an endless horizon of grey sea and grey sky over the North Atlantic, for example. In May 1919, the US Navy made the first aeroplane crossing of the Atlantic in a flying boat, making at least 4 stops and taking 23 days. 3 planes were dispatched and only 1 made it. For the longest flight, 21 US Navy ships stretched like a string of pearls across the ocean, so certain were they that their planes would crash. That same month, the Australian and American pair Hawker and Grieve had to ditch in the Atlantic and were picked up by a Danish freighter. That ship's radio was broken, so for 6 days, until it reached Scotland, the world assumed the pair were dead. At around 1:45 p.m. on 14th of June, John Alcock and Arthur Whitten Brown left Newfoundland in a modified Vickers-Vimy bomber plane. It was not an easy flight. The overloaded aircraft had difficulty taking off from the rough field and only barely missed the tops of the trees. A few hours later, their generator failed, depriving them of radio contact, their intercom and heating. An exhaust pipe burst shortly afterwards, causing a frightening noise which made conversation impossible. Then they flew into thick fog. Blind flying in fog or cloud should only be undertaken with gyroscopic instruments, which they did not have, and Alcock twice lost control of the aircraft, nearly hitting the sea after a spiral dive. They later said they could taste the ocean spray, so close were they to crashing. At 12:15 a.m, Brown got a glimpse of the stars, and using his sextant he found that they were on course. Their electric heating suits had failed, making them very cold in the open cockpit, but their coffee was spiked with whiskey. Later, they flew into a large snowstorm. They were drenched by rain, their instruments iced up. The plane was in danger of becoming unflyable. The carburetors also iced up. It's been said that Brown had to climb out onto the wings to clear the engines. Nearly 16 hours after takeoff and 1,890 miles later, they spotted the Irish coast and shortly came to earth in what they thought was a green field, but it turned out to be Derrygimlagh bog. Their plane crash-landed on the soft surface and nosedived into the bog, but both of them emerged unscathed, to the amazement of those Marconi operatives. The Atlantic had been crossed by air, and the world wanted to know about it. Tom Kenny, known as Tom Cork, had been editor of the Connacht Tribune in Galway since its foundation 10 years earlier. He established an international reputation as a reporter from the front line for a time during the Great War and was one of Ireland's leading provincial journalists. As global interest in the Atlantic Challenge grew during 1919, Tom let it be known amongst his many contacts in Galway that he'd appreciate a call if they spotted an aircraft heading east over the west coast. That Saturday evening, he received a telegram from London reporting that Alcock Brown had left Newfoundland, heading towards Galway, and expected to arrive about lunchtime the following day. And on Sunday morning, Tom received a call from the local RIC sergeant in Ballyconneely near Clifden, telling him that the two airmen were having breakfast with him and would he like to meet them. Tom made the bone-juddering 2-hour journey in his Model T Ford, reaching Derrygimlagh shortly after an official from the Royal Aero Club also crash-landed tail up in the bog, having flown out for more and more. He was there to verify the details of the crossing, which he did, and telegraphed the news back to London. That was the signal for the world's media, including the prize-sponsoring Daily Mail, to race to Galway to be amongst the first to speak to the flying heroes. But Tom Cork from the Connacht Tribune was there first. With no train due from Dublin until the morning, Tom knew he had some exclusive time with Alcock Brown, and he used it well. He wrote several pieces, including the facts of the flight, biographies of the two airmen, plus a lengthy interview with Captain John Alcock. Tom accompanied them back to Galway, where he promptly filed his reports to international agencies in London and New York, before the man from the Daily Mail even met the airmen. Tom Kenny's reports and interviews, with a Connacht Tribune byline, were carried in all of the major daily newspapers in the US, the UK and across Europe, all of which were only too delighted to scoop the Daily Mail. Legend has it that Tom hoodwinked the world's media when they arrived in Galway on the train from Dublin at lunchtime on the Monday and poured into Eyre Square in search of the flyers. It's said that he was entertaining Alcock Brown in the railway hotel and smuggled them out the back directly onto the train, which was returning to Dublin, from where he accompanied them to London to meet the King. Whether Tom Cork got to meet the King is debatable, but you can't dispute the fact that the Connacht Tribune's editor scooped the world, using his knowledge and connections across Galway and his considerable skill as a journalist. He reported a local story with international importance, and the world took notice. Local stories are still important to their communities, and every week the Connacht Tribune and Galway City Tribune continue to bring you your community news in print, online, on social and on mobile. The Connacht Tribune, your community, your news, your way.